Welcome to the San Gorgonio Chapter's Trail Talk series. My name is John St. Clair, and I am the Zoom host for the Trail Talk series. I'm also a member of the Trail Talk committee, as are Carla Kelms and Julianne Anderson. And each month we get a speaker to talk about something, and it is recorded, and it will be posted probably by noon tomorrow on the San Gorgonio Chapter YouTube channel. And the email reminder I sent out to everybody, although some people blocked it so it didn't get to them, but if you got the email reminder, the link to the San Gorgonio Chapter YouTube channel is in that reminder email. So as the Zoom host, I want to make sure everybody is muted, except for the speaker, of course. And I'm looking at the lists, and if you aren't muted, I'm muting you. Looks like just about everybody's muted. That's good. And if you have a question of our speaker, what we want you to do is type in the question in the chat section, and down at the bottom of your screen, you should see a little talking bubble with the word chat under it. If you click on that, it opens up a chat box on the side, and the default is to send the chat to everyone and just leave it there, and type in your message and press enter or return, depending on which kind of computer you have. And everyone will see your question, and Julianne's going to be monitoring that and relaying questions to our speaker tonight. But we want everybody to stay muted, and eventually your questions will get answered. Just type them in the chat section. So I want to point out that Trail Talk was started at first because there were no outings. Sierra Club canceled all of them, but we do have outings now. And if you go to the San Gorgonio Chapter website, you can see what hikes are planned. And of course, the outings and events section is where the Trail Talk is listed as well. And next month's Trail Talk topic is Wildflowers Super Bloom, presented by Carla Kelms. And I'm sure that'll be a great presentation, and I have entered it on the website. You can register for that if you're interested in the wildflower super blooms. And I think that's about it. I'm going to introduce now Julianne Anderson, who's also a member of the Trail Talk Committee, and Julianne will introduce our speaker as soon as I get the spotlight on her. There we go. Take it away.
Thanks, John. Good evening, everyone. Hope you're having a good evening. I think we're going to have a delightful talk by our friend and colleague Norman Bossom today, and he's going to be talking to us about the renowned Mojave Road. I want to share my screen because Norm sent me a very intriguing map. So let me get my okay, here it is. Here's the map of the Mojave Road that Norm has sent me. And I just wanted you to take a look at it. This is the area that is in the Mojave National Preserve, which is north of Interstate 40 between Barstow and the California-Arizona border, and east of I-15. And so this whole area here is Mojave National Preserve. But this was many years before Senator Feinstein and Alan Cranston and Sierra Club and all the groups put together the preserve. The Mojave Road was a throughway here since the 19th century. And Norm is going to tell us all about that. So I just wanted you to see this beautiful little map that Norm sent. It's the nicest map that I've seen of the road. and gives you sort of a pictorial notion before Norm starts his talk. I wanted to also give you a brief introduction of Norm. He's very modest. He's telling us to let you all know that he's a San Gorgonio chapter outings leader right now, and has been the outings chair, as well as the political chair for the Mojave group for the past 6 years. So he's the current outings chair and the current political chair for Mojave up in the high desert. And he also serves as a member of the San Gorgonio chapter executive committee. So he is on the governing committee. Some fun facts that he didn't share with us. Norm has this secret fascinating life as a police detective in the UK. So it's Detective Norm as well as Coach Norm. But Detective Inspector Norman Bossom is now here stateside and giving us the benefit of his detection skills and his historical skills. I know he's a member of a local historian in the Apple Valley High Desert area, and boy, does it show with his, not only this, but in his prior presentations about desert history. The Bighorn Mine was just a beautiful presentation that I gave a few months back. So he will be presenting in a few months in July, I believe, on hiking in the UK. So anyone that's heading over the pond to the UK can get some tips on hiking from the master, from someone who has lived there, grew up there, and can tell us what we need to know about preparing to hike, to do some hiking in the United Kingdom. Norm also wanted us to briefly present about the Mojave Road so that he could slide into his presentation. The Mojave Road itself stretches 138 miles across the desert of the same name. From the Colorado River in Arizona to the Mojave River in California, close to Afton Canyon. Its history is varied and covers thousands of years. From the natives of the area to the Spanish explorers to the US military in the mid to late 1800s. Couple this with stunning vistas and you have a recipe for an interesting and enlightening prospect, which Norm will discuss. So take it away, Norm.
Okay. It's like, what do I press next?
Well, I've got to get out of my screen share here.
Yeah, Julianne needs to finish the screen share. Okay, so now Norm, you can share your screen. Let me put you on Spotlight too. There, you're on Spotlight, and then just down at the bottom of your screen where it says share screen.
All right.
You want to share to desktop and then open up your slideshow. Okay, your screen sharing. Here we go.
Yeah, that's a good start.
Yeah, and just click on play and it'll get rid of the side thing and give us a bigger picture.
Okay.
The play button's up at the top. It's a triangle. Yeah, right.
Yep. Ah, excellent. Yeah, that's terrific. Well, good evening, everybody. One of the things I say about this particular presentation is that the history of the area is extremely varied and there is so much of it. So what I have to do is be a little bit selective, be a little bit careful, because there is just so much. And every day when I'm researching these things, I'm finding something else out. So, and that's exciting, but it's like, it really does, we don't want to be here till 12 o'clock tonight. So we're going to make it a little bit shorter. First thing I want to tell you is that in the chat section, I put in 2 books. One is called the Mojave Road Guide, which my particular copy is from 1986. And it was written by a guy called Dennis Casebeer. And in 1980, Dennis Casebeer started the Friends of Mojave Road. And it's just grown astronomically since then. And Dennis wrote 24 books. Most of them were updates of the Mojave Road Guide, because as you can imagine out there, it changes. But one book that he did do, he did write The Tales of the Mojave Road, the military. I've put that on there as well. Just an outstanding book. Dennis wrote it. Sadly, Dennis died in 2021. He was 86 years of age. So I guess you'd call him the father of the Mojave Road. And if anybody's interested in traveling the Mojave Road, there are two things I say to them. In fact, there are three things I say to them. Okay, let's make it four. Number one, you want the Mojave Road Guide. Number two, you want a Garmin. And number three, you want four-wheel drive, preferably two vehicles, because it can get a little bit sandy out there. And the most important thing to remember is that AAA doesn't go out there. So that's why you take two vehicles, so somebody could tow you in if they have to. Okay. Interestingly, what they say is that this area that we're talking about was actually inhabited as far ago as 10,000 years. Don't quite know how they get to that, but it's probably due to pottery and bones and that sort of thing that they've discovered out there. We know for a fact that at least 3,000 years ago, and generally that's decided by examining the petroglyphs, and we have some of those as well. So the natives used the Mojave Road. It was mainly the Mojave Indians who were actually living on the Colorado River in Arizona, where Fort Mojave is. And these guys were, basically settled where they were because they were agriculturally dependent. Many of the tribes in the area, Chemehuevi, the Paiutes, they were actually hunter-gatherers, so they could just travel around anywhere, but the Mojave Indians were perhaps a little bit stuck. One of the things that is that you find from the research is that these natives traveled the road from water source to water source, and they were basically selling stuff, using beads and things like that. Trust me, they weren't interested in gold. We know that the Spanish were in the area in the 1740s, and the first recorded details of any Spanish incursion was by Father Garces in 1776, and I'm sure people have heard of him. And when he arrived in this area, the Mojave Indians actually escorted him across the desert so he could get into San Bernardino. And next up was Jose Zaldivar. He was also a father, and he came along in 1806. And Father Zaldivar was actually spent 2 years locally here in Summit Valley with the Vanyumi Indians. The first record we have of a white person is Jedediah Smith. And Jedediah Smith was he just did everything. He was a trapper, hunter. He was just going all over the place. And he turned up there and they actually escorted him across the Mojave Desert as well, into San Bernardino. And apparently when he came back, things got a little bit testy because he was trapping lots of animals, and the local natives felt that he should be actually rewarding them for doing it, because as we know, for many, many years, this was their land. Jedediah Smith came through in 1826. In 1831, he disappeared off the face of the earth while tramping around New Mexico. He was only 32 years of age, and they never ever did find his body. I strongly suspect that he probably upset a few more of the locals, as appeared to be his wont. And I bring his name up as the first white person, and also because there is a small, well, they call it a butte, which is named after him, which I have a picture of. So the history is that California seceded from Mexico in 1848 after the Mexican-American War. And then what happened, people started traveling west, coming through Arizona, Colorado, and they would come through this area. And there wasn't really very many problems with the natives, but as many more came through, then things started to get a little bit heated. And in 1858, the wagon trail from Colorado, Arizona, was to come across the Mojave River, the Colorado River, and go through the desert. And there was a guy called Edward Fitzgerald Beale, a very interesting character, and he was given the job by the president to build a road from the Colorado River through to the Mojave River. And to start with, it was known as the Old Government Road. I think it's probably us that have named it the Mojave Road. So that was his job. And at the Fort Mojave area in 1858, this is what he did. He actually took the road to the Colorado River, put a raft crossing in to get over to California, and then continued on all the way through to where the Mojave River comes in on the other side of the Mojave Desert. As I said, he was an interesting character. He was employed as an Indian agent. He was employed by the Department of the Interior, and he was actually the guy who he managed to acquire enough land for the Tejon Ranch, which is 240,000 acres, still in existence. It's privately owned, and it was he managed to get loads of the land from the Mexicans and other land, including Fort Tejon, which was closed in the 1860s. So he used his position extremely well, and that Tejon Ranch is actually in the Grapevine area. For those of you who may have heard of it, I'd certainly heard of it, but I didn't quite know where it was. But that's where it was. So he's got his wagon trail now, and then there was some the local Mojave Indians weren't very happy with all the people that were coming through, and they realized it was a threat to their land. And there were a few altercations that took place, which were designated as a Mojave Indian War. The thing to remember is that the Mojave Indians didn't have guns, and the settlers did, as did the military. Anyway, it was decided that they needed to get a grip on these Indians, and so what they did, they started Fort Mojave in 1859, and it didn't look anything like this. This is all modern stuff that was there. And what they did, they stuck them in this place. It wasn't a reservation or anything like that, but to control them, what they did, they would arrest 6 of the leaders and incarcerate them. And they would tell the natives, if you don't misbehave, these guys will face the consequences. So that sort of calmed that down. And that's how Fort Mojave started. Mainly it was a tent encampment for the army, and obviously the natives were living there in their wigwams or whatever it was that they had. During the Civil War, the military pulled out of Fort Mojave for 2 years, probably to 1864 to 1866. Can't quite find out the exact date, but that was probably it. And they were left to their own devices. And following that, there was some skirmishes with people coming through with their wagons. And so the army came back. And they remained at Fort Mojave until 1890, when it became part of a reservation. So it's a massive area. This is actually in Arizona. It's you can see that there's some pretty modern concrete there, but they haven't been living there for a number of years. So it was probably from the 1830s, 1840s. And that's another view of it. As I said, it is vast, that area. And what happens is it's still part of the reservation. So to get to it, you've got to actually drive into Arizona, fill up on cheap gas, and then find the entrance to this place, which is not signposted. But if you've got your Garmin, you'll find it. And you have to walk about a mile in to get to it. There's a sort of the remnants of a fence there, so which you can just walk through. And I'm sure nobody will mind if you're not going to do anything untoward. This is the area of Beals Crossing. The reason that I put this one up was purely and simply because at the top you can actually see some posts that are there. This was from an 1828 Indian school that was there, and you can see all the other bits of it that are still down here. And this was the area in which Beals Crossing was situated. Man, that river moves pretty damn fast, it's got to be said. Over into California, just thought I'd show that bit. There's no question about it. It can get wet in there. It looks like a small stream. Beautiful rock formations. Petroglyphs. I have done so much research into petroglyphs, and it's really frustrating because it appears that nobody knows what they mean. If you look at them, you'll see the patina. These are obviously very, very old. You tend to find that the ones that aren't so old that our tagging friends put in, they're going to be scraped. These have been chipped. As I said, what on earth it means, I don't know. And no, the one on the left, he's not a spaceman from another planet. And there's some more. But as I say, you can see the patina, you can see that it's been chipped, and you can see that it's very, very old. And the man from Mars is on the left as you look at it. If that's how you see it, or you've been smoking some of the good stuff. And there we are on the Mojave Road in the wash, just down from the petroglyphs. Just another picture to show you the area. I love this picture. This picture is taken from Paiute Canyon, and the hill that you can see, the butte, is Jedediah Smith Butte, apparently. Now, getting into here is really, really difficult. In fact, the Mojave Road actually goes around the canyon, and you can drive in there. As I say, it's very rocky. You're not really supposed to stay there, but we did. And I'm pleased to say I actually slept out under the stars here, and it was absolutely fabulous. And the other thing is there's thousands of gallons of water from a spring coming down by the side of where you camp out. It really is lovely. Beautiful place. It's probably my favorite place on the Mojave Road, and I'll show you some more of it. Paiute Canyon, and you can see how green it is because of the road, the water. Beautiful canyon. We hiked 3 miles in there, and as you hike on that side of the canyon and you look over, you can actually see the remnants of the old Mojave Road, which hasn't been used in years. It's really beaten up. Fort Paiute, remarkable place. It just goes to show exactly what happened here. The corral is actually bigger than the quarters for the soldiers, and the corral, the horses were only for the officers, and the men had to walk everywhere. They were all infantry, so it was pretty tough there in the desert. As you can see, there's a storehouse, fireplace, And they were there from November 1867 to May 1868. And the only reason that they were there for that shorter period of time was because in May of 1868, they rerouted the mail. So they said, oh, well, we don't need you there anymore then. The remnants of Fort Paiute. And there it is on the hill, obviously. So they can look down, and the stream is close by, so they've got water. It would have been fairly comfortable, I imagine. Oh. Right, let's just go back there. Yeah, Paiute Canyon. Okay, you leave Paiute Canyon and you head off, and there's an elevation gain, and you can see the soft sand in the Mojave Road. This is Landfair Valley. It has been in its time massive cattle ranch, and I mean really, really big. And here you can see, because of the altitude, you can actually see all the beautiful Joshua trees. It really is a lovely area. And for out of interest, Joshua trees grow between 1,300 and 5,900 feet. That's what they tell me. Okay, next we get to Camp Rock. This is another fascinating place. What you can see there is 3 happy campers and 1. This house was built in 1929 by a guy called Bartholomew Smith. Bartholomew Smith was a soldier in the First World War, and he was affected by the gas. And what the doctors told him was, eventually, in the early 20s, they said to him, that's your lot, you haven't got long to live, your lungs are no good. So he came out into the desert, and this is what he built, and it's still there. And Bart and 2 friends were raising goats, and there was a gold mine close by, very close. And this was the building that they lived in. And he lived there for 25 years before his death. So there's no question the air out here in the desert is pretty darn good for you. And that is those are the springs at Camp Rock, and you can see the rocks are all nicely formed. There's obviously been lots of water in there. The water is very seasonal. Very interesting thing about this, because there are no remains here of the soldiers, even though they built small places out of adobe, because I'm sure they were pretty bored. And they were here from 1862 through to 1867. Interesting thing about this Camp Rock, during that period of time, the soldiers were there on and off. When it was obviously decided they need to get over there because the natives were perhaps getting a bit restless. There were 78 men who served at Camp Rock over that period of time. That includes the officers. And of that 78, 21 of them deserted during that period of time. And in fairness to them, it must have been really, really hard living there. And obviously there's water. The food was probably pretty abysmal, because you were waiting on stuff coming through on the Mojave Road or up the Colorado River. It couldn't get much further than where Needles is today. And so these guys, they had a pretty paltry diet, and a lot of them had scurvy, which, as we know, is a lack of vitamin C. So it was pretty darn tough out there. The only thing I would say is that none of the Native Americans were getting scurvy, so I wonder what they were eating. They must have found something in the desert that had vitamin C in it. moving on from Camp Rock, there was a small area where there's, as you can see, there's some blacktop. We're driving along and it's like, and brakes on, and there's one of our desert tortoises. Fascinating little creatures. And of course, he obviously realized we were coming and stopped. And what we decided to do was, because I am told that if you pick them up and start messing with them, then they will expel the water that they've got, and then they stand a good chance of dying because they need to retain that water. So if you ever have to pick one up, and hopefully you don't, then all you do is just lift them a couple of inches the way they're facing and just move them out of the way. We didn't touch him, we just left him there, drove around him, because there wasn't an awful lot of traffic going on at that time. It's great to see one of them. All the years I've spent here in the desert and hiking out there, it's only the second one I've ever seen. This is a picture I absolutely love. The reason I put it in there is because you can see the Mojave Road to the right. And then when you start to look into the distance, you can actually see the Mojave Road heading off across the desert there. Absolutely beautiful. And the Mojave foliage and everything there, creosote bushes, and that's a Mojave yucca. Next, Marl Springs, interesting place. Aren't they all? This place was at one stage a large cattle ranch. Not suggesting that there were very many buildings there. In 1867, interesting fact was that there were actually 3 soldiers posted there, and they put some rocks up to make themselves a building of sorts, because what the army decreed was that when they were out there, they wouldn't be supplied with anything that would help them to build. They had to use what they could find. So they would use adobe or they would use rocks. And they built a small redoubt. And then the next thing, that they've got 20 to 30 Native Americans that have got them under siege. And the reason that the Native Americans wouldn't have charged them was because the soldiers did have guns and the Native Americans didn't. It was 1867, so there weren't many guns around for them. Only the only ones they could get, the ones they could steal. And they held out for a couple of days, and then a troop of infantry came through, and the Native Americans just scattered into the hills. So Marl Springs, it was used on and off. Reason is because there's water there. Truthfully, not a lot of water. You can actually see the tank where they kept the water, and there's a small tube going into it. The thing I love about this picture is the fact that you can see the old fence posts, and you can see the clouds hanging over the rocks, over the mountains. Absolutely beautiful. It's just spectacular out there. Okay, it's silly time. And all these people traveling across the Mojave Road, some of them decided that they were going to just drop off some frogs. That's exactly what they did. And it's grown. I don't think that the authorities are particularly happy about it, but don't know that it really does any harm. But there's some really cracking little frogs there. Anyway, and then somebody decided that they were going to put some jeeps in there. And so they were dropping off jeeps. And then the next thing that happened, well, this had happened, this was the first one that went out, were the gnomes. And yeah, what can I tell you about the gnomes? Yeah, crazy people. There we are. That's the mailbox in the middle of the Mojave. Apparently, and it's an official mailbox. There is a book in there that you can sign, and people actually, surprisingly, people actually leave money there. And you sort of look at it and you think, well, what are they leaving money here for? There's nowhere out there to spend it. It's It's really something. Okay, we then go on across the desert, and as you saw, the roads there are quite sandy. That's why you really need to go out there in four-wheel drive vehicles. Okay, this place, Isaacs, this place has a history all of its own. It's actually gone for a minute. Soda Springs was its real name, and there was a redoubt there. The military were there for a short period of time, and there is water there, but it is actually mineral water, so it apparently doesn't taste very nice, but it's not at all bad for you. So the soldiers had to stay there, and after they left, moving on many years actually to 1944, a guy called Curtis Springer moved there, and he was a kind of a radio evangelist. He was also an entrepreneur, and he decided that he could use the water to heal people while he was also healing them with his words of wisdom. And what he did, and I find it quite amazing that this happened, that he got a lot of ex-cons and ex-military there who were down on their luck, and they ended up building a 40-50 room hotel and other various buildings. And Curtis Springer was there from 1944 to 1974. And the reason it's actually, as it's called Soda Springs, and that is its real name, fine, but he decided that was a bit boring, so he decided to call it Isaacs. And for those of you who have headed off through Barstow on the I-15 to Vegas or anywhere else in that distance, you would have passed the signs for Isaacs. It's still there, and it is it's a desert studies center for Cal State, but it is under the control of the authorities. There's even a book been written on it, and that's how important it was. But what they said to Mr. Springer was, you know what, man, you can't stay here. And so he offered to pay $12,000 in back rent. And they said, no, we don't want it, off you go. And so Curtis Springer had to leave. Soda Lake. So Soda Lake is close to Soda Springs. It's a massive dry lake. And what you do when you drive through it, you will, along the Mojave Road, you'll come across this. And I've seen pictures of it when it was 20 times smaller than that. So what you do is you stop and you put a rock on it, because that's what people do. Either that or they'll stick a gnome on it. And that is actually Soda Lake. And another beautiful picture. Interestingly, Soda Lake is closed at the moment. And this is another thing that you need to do if you decide to go along the Mojave Road, is that you have to check it, because they will tell you, this area is closed. Soda Dry Lake is closed because it's not a dry lake at the moment. Apparently it's extremely muddy. As you cross Soda Lake, you get in towards the back end of Afton Canyon. And for those of you who don't know Afton Canyon, it stretches 6 or 7 miles. The Mojave Road goes straight through the middle of it. And Afton Canyon is just the most spectacular place. I call it the Grand Canyon of the high desert. It really is, it's worth seeing on its own. Anyway, what happened, it was, and I'll get the dates right. This is a place called Baxter. There's 2 brothers who decided that they were going to mine for stuff for the cement, the limestone. So they were going to mine for limestone, and eventually they put a train track in there so that they could get the limestone out. Interesting thing about this, and you can see where the train track is. Interesting thing is that the rocks are, it's like drywall, and it's massive. And as you can see, it's holding up an awful lot of stuff behind it. Well, they would have had to have been mining an awful lot of limestone to make it worthwhile putting a train in there, but they did. And Baxter ran from 1914 to 1926, and from 14 to 19, it had a post office. Then there was a gap, and from 23 to 26, it had a post office. And in its halcyon days, there were 60 people working there. And those are the remains of it now. Afton Canyon. I mean, the picture tells the story. It's just 7 miles of the most spectacular place you'll see in the Mojave Desert. Really is gorgeous. And there's another shot of some decomposing lime, I guess it's sandstone, decomposing sandstone. But this runs all the way through it. As I say, you can drive through it. When you get to the bottom of Afton Canyon, you cross the Mojave River, and from there it goes, the Mojave Road goes for 5 or 6 miles to where Camp Cady was. There is no Camp Cady there now. That's long gone, although it did run from 1862 through, with the Civil War gap, through to 1869. And there was a doctor there. There were actually soldiers there with their wives and children, and they built, put up adobe buildings. There were atrocities committed there against the Native Americans, cutting off their heads and putting them on stakes. And the only reason I bring that up is because in Dennis Casebier's book on the military, he gets all his information about the military from the official records, and he's got absolutely stacks of it. And that's what makes the book, the Mojave Road and the Military, that's what makes it really so interesting. The facts he has are really tremendous, and it seems extremely likely, and from what's said, it's a fact that the officers, most of the officers in the military out there, wouldn't allow the soldiers to commit any atrocities or anything like that. And on the odd occasion they did, but it was forbidden, and they put a stop to it. Right, what I'm going to do is go back to Fort Mojave. Have some facts about Fort Mojave. The military left in 1890, mainly because of the railroad and the fact that the Mojave Road wasn't used so much by the wagon trains. Interestingly, Edward Fitzgerald Beale, the guy I told you about, he actually purchased the camels from the military back in the 1860s, and he tried to get camel trains going through the Mojave Desert. Unfortunately, the people driving the mules said that the mules were upset by the camels, and that was very short-lived. But as we know, because he owned the Tejon Ranch, he was a real entrepreneur, was Mr. Beale. And Mr. Beale's other claim to fame was that he said that the natives in the desert here, they won't survive, not with everything coming their way. That was his quote. Unfortunately, and that's why I say he was very wrong. So the Mojave, the Indians, this is part of their reservation. There are 600 of them on it. If you've ever been to the Ave Macar casino between Needles and got the name of it now, just up from Needles. Anyway, the Ave Macar casino, if you've ever been there, you'll see it signposted on the road. And that is the original name of the Mojave Indians. And that casino is, by all intents and purposes, owned by them. The Mojave Reservation, there are 23,000 acres in Arizona, 12,000 in California, and 5,000 in Colorado. That brings us up to date. Okay.
All right, thank you, Norm. Can you stop the share?
Okay, tell me how I do that. Oh yeah, I see, I got it. Actually, I'm not getting a. No.
Or we can answer, you can answer the questions with this screen on there, I suppose.
Yeah, why don't we do that? Nice background for Q&A. Norm, a couple of things in the chat. Talk about the travelers using the Mojave Road. Were these Mormon pioneers, people that were coming down to avoid the southerly route during the Civil War? Was this a stage route at all? Was it miners, people going to San Bernardino? Who were the people using this route?
Okay, the Mormons were using the Old Spanish Trail, which basically followed the Mojave River.
Okay.
And the Mojave Road actually joined up with the Old Spanish Trail.
Okay, so that went
So
through.
these people were coming from New Mexico, Arizona, and Colorado, whereas the Mormons were coming down from Utah.
Okay. Okay.
So the people that were using it were just people trying to make a new life for themselves. And I mean, there's no actual historical records that tell you how many were coming, how they were coming, but you would imagine that they would probably be in groups of 10 to 20, because they would want to be traveling with somebody who could lead them, so they would have to pay that person. You know, as happened to the 49ers, that's exactly what they did. And the interesting thing about the 49ers is that they were also helped by the Native Americans as well. So yeah, you know, there are stories, you know, that in the end, you know, some of these people coming in the wagons were just shooting at, if they saw any Native Americans, they just shot at them. And I'm sure if they had to do it from distance, they probably weren't good shots. But no, they were just people looking for a new life, heading down towards the San Bernardino County.
Tell us more about the impact of the Civil War on the Mojave Road. Did the army just completely withdraw?
Yes, they did. Yeah, it was basically a 2-year period. They were pulled out of there. You know, I think their attitude was, well, nothing much is going to be coming through here, and we've got a war to fight. So they pulled them out. There's nothing I can find that tells us where they went, or, I mean, we can only assume that they were pulled out because they were needed somewhere else.
Tell us some more about what happened to the various tribes along the road. It sounds like it was pretty cataclysmic. People being shot, people eventually being placed in reservations. I mean, was there any attempt to negotiate, to set aside land, or was it just cataclysm?
Okay, what they did, they always negotiated a peace. They always negotiated with them for that. And then if they weren't happy with it, they would just lock up some of their leaders and say to them, you know, if you don't behave, they'll face the consequences. The Mojave Indians, as I've just said, there's 600 of them now, and they live on the reservation. There were the Chemehuevi, who are certainly around. Where they are, I don't know. I do know that Beale was in charge in the West for arranging reservations, and that's exactly what he did. Also, the Paiutes, they're around. These a lot of these tribes or bands of Indians actually got together and ended up being on reservations. And of course, as we know now, a lot of them have got casinos, as we know from San Bernardino, don't we? So yeah, that's what happened. They would always negotiate a peace, but they would always have the upper hand because they had the guns.
I was just thinking about what happened to some of the tribes up north in the Bishop area where they had a California version of the Trail of Tears where they were marched to Tejon. And I wonder if there was any connection since Beale had a ranching operation up there, if any of the Indians from the Mojave area were marched up to Tejon.
Not to my knowledge, no. I've read about it as the Owens Valley Indians. Yeah, they were marched off. Yeah, that's absolutely true. I mean, there was a Fort Tejon, and that went very, very quickly in 1880s, and that's when they started organizing all the reservations for these people. I think the Mojave Indians were probably very lucky because they actually stayed in the area that they were originally living in, and to this day they're still there.
Tell us about the railroad. Did the original railroad, I know there were several small rail lines that came into the Mojave Preserve. Was there a line that kind of roughly paralleled the Mojave Road, or what did it parallel the Interstate 40? And was that the main cause for the Mojave Road's cessation of use?
It was 1883 when the railroad came in, and they came down, basically down through from a more northerly direction. That's where they came down. And of course, there was, or there still is, a railroad that runs along the 40. In fact, there's a railroad museum there as well with everything. So, but that probably came later. But the first one to come through came down from north to south, south to north, and that was 1883. And I guess they were able then to just deal with everything that they needed to deal with. I don't know when the railroad came in that goes alongside the 40. I don't know when that came in.
I know there's a more southerly pioneer trail into San Diego. I know there was like a Butterfield stage line that went from Riverside County east into Arizona, New Mexico, and Texas, and they cut that off because of the Civil War, because Texas was part of the Confederacy, and they couldn't run the stage line through there anymore safely. Did during the Civil War and after, or during, did the Mojave Road see more traffic of just people kind of coming through Colorado and avoiding the Confederacy and coming into Southern California that way?
Yeah, I have no record of that at all. There's no record of the numbers of people that would have come through. I would imagine almost certainly that I'd have thought it would have slowed down considerably, for the simple reason that people are like, if you're trying to get away from the Civil War, then as paranoid as people were in those days, then they're going to be worried about the Native Americans. So it's, it all becomes very difficult. And of course, knowing that there's no protection out there, they're on their own, that makes it difficult as well. Yeah, that's what I would have thought would have happened.
In your view, were there more people coming in to farm around San Bernardino and ranch in kind of the flatlands in western Riverside and San Bernardino counties, or were they mining? What was going on?
Mining.
Okay.
Yeah, it's real easy. Yeah, what they've suggested is that a lot of these soldiers who who went AWOL, they went off and started mining. There's loads of mountains out there, particularly towards the north, and they reckoned that they were mining in those areas. That's what they were doing. In fact, at Camp Cady, there was one captain there who would let his men go out for 2 days a week to stop them being bored and allow them to go off somewhere and mine for gold. Yeah, and in actual fact, it's not a bad idea. Bearing in mind that these people have got absolutely nothing to do out there, and it must have been pretty wicked. So getting them to put up adobe buildings is a great idea, keeps them busy. And the idea that you just let them go off for give them a couple of days leave, go off and do, and then they would come back. I suspect that a lot of those who left just to go mining, and they didn't come back, particularly the ones at Camp Rock. I mean, they talk about overall with the military in the Mojave, they talk about a 17% desertion rate. And the other thing to remember is that all of these guys are infantry. So they have to walk everywhere, except of course the officers. But the other thing to understand is there wouldn't be enough food and water for everybody to have horses. It just makes sense, really. But it certainly didn't make it any easier for those poor guys. I really feel for them. It must have been horrific.
A couple of modern questions, and then we'll wrap up. What's the lithium mining situation around the Mojave Road area and north of the preserve? And is the National Park Service doing anything to preserve the Mojave Road?
I don't believe that they are, no. I failed to see what they could really do because, they certainly keep an eye on it. And if it gets a bit, if it's bad in places, then they'll just close it. Are they going to repair it? I mean, that seems to me to be a lifetime job. What it seems is that people will work their way around these things. They will work their way around them. There's no question about that. I mean, the original, this is not, in many places it is the original Mojave Road, but in some places it isn't, because you've had to, like Paiute Canyon, the Mojave Road went straight through the middle of it, and then they were like, no, we can't do this, so they just sent them around it. So yeah, that's what happens. As for lithium mining, I've got to be honest with you, I don't know of any lithium mining in this area at all. Never heard anything about it. I don't actually believe there is any.
Final question. How can people access Afton Canyon from Interstate 15?
Right. If you drive along Interstate 15, if you're going towards Vegas, you'll see a signpost to the right, which says Zysaks. Sorry, if you've gone to Zysaks, you've gone too far. The Afton Canyon is again to the right, as is Zysaks. And the Afton Canyon, you just go down there 3 miles. There is a campground there. It's really nice. The Mojave River flows there, but it's just it's a stunning area. I highly recommend it. If you do nothing else, go and have a walk around Afton Canyon. It's unbelievable, it really is. But Zysaks is another one. You can go in there, and that's just a bit further along off the 40. Another interesting place.
Well, Norm, another beautiful presentation. Thank you so much for all your knowledge and your research and giving us these materials and guidance, so that if people want to explore it on foot or they want a 4-wheel drive out there, they have some resources. Just beautifully done. Thank you.
You are welcome, of course.